How many times have you heard the claim that 97% of scientists agree that human-caused global warming is happening?
The planet is warming, and human activity is contributing to it.
A survey of thousands of scientific papers that took a position on climate change found that 97% endorsed the position that humans are causing global warming.
So 97%.
97%.
That 97% number, that's been debunked in several studies.
This 97% is essentially pulled from thin air.
97% of all scientists believe...
Is this a bogus number?
It's so not a bogus number.
It's so a bogus
Okay, yours is, mine is, yours is.
Have you used this statement? Do you even know where it comes from or who published the poll and study? Now, this is a poll and study that nearly all of your politicians across the world are using to justify trillions of dollars of tax increases on citizens in countless countries, as well as billions of dollars worth of regulations. So wouldn't you want to know where this claim comes from? The answer is that this claim was taken from a study and a survey done by a self-employed cartoonist named John Cook. Not a climate scientist, not a rocket scientist, and as a matter of fact, not a scientist of any kind, a cartoonist. But rather than discredit this massive claim, based solely upon his credentials, a claim, mind you, that has been used by politicians worldwide, let's go ahead and show you why this 97% claim should be discredited based on the poll and study itself, once and for all.
The entire Arctic ice cap may completely and totally disappear in summer in as little as 5 years.
The entire North Polar ice cap could be completely ice-free within the next 5 to 7 years.
First of all, the study itself is based on around 13,000 peer-reviewed climate documents, and this old claim has been constantly contested by investigative journalists at many news outlets like The Guardian, at Forbes magazine, by scientists at MIT, and the actual climate scientists who were even involved in the study itself who say that their responses to the questions were taken completely out of context. Richard Toll, for instance, who is an author of one of the climate papers in Cook's study, says that most of the papers they studied are not about climate change and its causes, but many were taken as evidence nonetheless. Papers on carbon taxes naturally assume that carbon dioxide emissions cause global warming, but assumptions are not conclusions. Cook's claim of an increasing consensus over time is entirely due to an increase of the number of irrelevant papers that Cook and company mistook for evidence. The abstracts of 12,000 papers were rated twice by 24 volunteers. 12 of them dropped out rapidly, leaving an enormous task for the rest. This shows that there are patterns in the data that suggest that raters may have fallen asleep with their noses on the keyboard. In July of 2013, Mr. Cook claimed to have data that showed that this was not the case, but then in May of 2014, he claimed that the data never existed.
The difficulty here is the unspoken words. Climate always changes. That's the missing agenda. And every climate scientist knows this. Nothing unusual about climate change. The idea that somehow climate was stable until the Industrial Revolution and our carbon dioxide emissions is simply silly.
Now, before we get into the complete and utter falsification and misrepresentation of the study, it is also important to note that the Vostok ice core samples, which are some of the oldest existing ice core samples dating back 420,000 years, don't only show that the Earth has warmed before, as we all know, but they show that CO2 level rises have lagged behind the warming. This shows that the Earth has warmed exponentially several times before CO2 levels rose at all. Carbon emissions from industrialization are what our politicians are saying is causing this, right? Never mind the fact that we have only been in industry for around 100 years and that the warming has only been happening for around 50 years, but let's dig into this even further.
The vast majority, 87% of scientists, said that human activity is driving global warming, yet only half the American public ascribe to that view. So,
well, what website is
87%. The question is not whether or not the Earth has gone through cycles of cooling and warming.
Right.
The question is, are we exacerbating that? The vast majority of scientists say we are.
The bumbling fool Joe Rogan himself, back at it again. Anyway, the study from the poll itself, from the professional cartoon artist who works from home, is called Quantifying the Consensus on Anthropogenic Global Warming in the Scientific Literature. Anthropogenic global warming, or better known as AGW in climate lingo, means that humans are the main source of the warming. Many of the scientists whose papers were included in the study spoke out against the misrepresentation of their answers, but of course were drowned out by the mainstream media, who obviously has politicized the issue and quickly subdues any dissident voices. Some of the scientists who spoke out include Dr. Moon, Dr. Sorna, Dr. Carlin, Dr. Nicholas Scafetta, Dr. Craig D. Idzo, Dr. Nair Shaviv. I can go on and on and on. Cook and his colleagues, for example, classified a peer-reviewed paper by scientist Greg Idzo as explicitly supporting the consensus, in quotes, position on global warming. When Dr. Idzo was asked about this claim, he responded, and I quote, "It would be incorrect to claim that our paper was an endorsement of CO2-induced global warming or anthropogenic global warming." Other scientists who they polled in the study and also concluded that they are also in consensus highlighted a few very important misrepresentations. They say that the question that cartoonist Cook and his alarmist colleagues surveyed was simply whether humans have caused some global warming. This by no means concludes that humans are the major contributing factor of the approximate 1/3 of 1 degree change in the last 50 years. Now let's go to some of the other scientists whose paper Cook included as in agreement and see what they had to say when asked if this was true. Dr. Scafetta, is this an accurate representation of your paper? He responds, Cook's survey is based on a straw man argument. What my papers say is that the IPCC view is erroneous because about 48 to 70% of the global warming observed from 1900 to 2000 was induced solely by the sun. Dr. Shaviv, was this an accurate representation of your paper? He responds, nope. This is not an accurate representation of my paper. The paper shows that if cosmic rays are included in empirical climate sensitivity analyses, then one finds the different timescales consistently give a low climate sensitivity, i.e. supports the idea that cosmic rays affect the climate and that the climate sensitivity is low. This means that part of the 20th century should be attributed to the increase in solar activity, and that the 21st century, warming under a business-as-usual scenario, should be low, about 1 degree Celsius. The journalist asked any further comment on the Cook 2013 study. Shaviv says, science is not a democracy. Even if the majority of scientists think one thing, which they don't, they still are not necessarily correct. Dr. Morner, is this an accurate representation of your paper? Morner responds, and I quote, certainly not correct and certainly misleading. The paper is strongly against AGW and documents its absence in the sea level observational facts. Also, it invalidates the mode of sea level handling by the IPCC. Dr. Soon, is this an accurate representation of your paper? He responds, I am sure that this rating of no position on AGW by CO2 is nowhere accurate or correct. Rating our serious auditing paper from just a reading of the abstract words that were contained in the title of the paper is surely a bad mistake. Anyway, I can go on and on and on with how many scientists say that Cook misrepresented their paper and statements, but you get the point. It is also very important to talk about why politicians and lawmakers alike would want to misrepresent or use a study from a man with zero credentials in the field. To find out why they would do such a thing, we would have to do a little bit of critical thinking. Thankfully for you, I have already done it. Now let's start with this. There is absolutely no financial gain to global cooling. There's no financial gain to start saying that the Earth is cooling and we must do something about it, but there is a giant reason for them to push human AGW global warming, and it is happening. Has been happening, and there are instances of vast scandals and insider trading littered around this erroneous and salacious claim. Under Obama alone, there was over 100 solar companies that were financially backed by his administration by your tax dollars that have went completely and utterly bankrupt, sometimes within just a few months. A lot of people like to talk about the Cylindra scandal under his presidency and the possible shaving off the top that was happening there, but there was one very concerning instance that is much, much more grave. Son Edison. Many Obama cohorts were reported to be partaking in an insider trading scandal with Son Edison before it too went bankrupt. Nancy Pelosi's husband is most notable for reportedly investing about $1 million into Son Edison right before a giant rise in stock, gaining around $10 million in profits before the company went bankrupt. He quickly pulled his investment out just 2 weeks before the company went belly up. In my conclusion, my advice to everyone who is watching this and who will watch this, when you hear a politician or controlled and bought and paid for media personalities tell you that you need to pay more for something because it is for the greater good of all mankind and will save the world, just follow the long, dark, rabid, corrupt, and disgusting trail to find where the money goes.